I'm Sarah Thompson, 48, a single mother who worked 2 jobs for 20 years to give my daughter Heather everything. When she announced her engagement, I spent my entire savings, $45,000, on her dream wedding. But during the reception, Heather publicly mocked my job as a night cleaner, drawing laughs from her wealthy in-laws. As tears welled in my eyes, someone unexpected took the microphone, the groom's boss. What happened next changed everything between us. There's nothing more painful than betrayal from the child you sacrificed everything for. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever felt unappreciated by someone you love. My journey as a single mother began when Heather was just 3 years old. My husband David walked out on us without warning, leaving behind nothing but a brief note and mountains of debt I didn't even know existed. I discovered he'd taken out multiple credit cards in our name, emptied our joint account, and left me with a mortgage I couldn't possibly afford on my retail assistant salary. The first night after he left, I sat on our worn sofa after putting Heather to bed, surrounded by bills marked final notice and overdue, calculating that I was over $70,000 in debt. I remember how my hands trembled as I made lists of what I could sell, what bills needed immediate attention, and how I could possibly keep a roof over our heads. Within a week, I had taken on a second job cleaning offices at night. My daily routine became a punishing cycle, dropping Heather at the cheapest daycare I could find at 7 a.m., working as a receptionist from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., picking her up, making a quick dinner, leaving her with my elderly neighbor Mrs. Porter, then cleaning offices from 7 p.m. until 2 a.m. I would stumble home, sleep for 4 hours, and start again. We moved from our modest house to a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood called Riverdale. It wasn't dangerous, but it certainly wasn't the kind of place I had imagined raising my daughter. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator. The pipes clanked all night, the window in the kitchen didn't close properly, and the carpet was so worn you could see the concrete underneath in places. I converted the bedroom into Heather's room, while I slept on a pull-out sofa in the living room. I decorated her small space with colorful posters and second-hand stuffed animals, determined that she would have at least one place that felt special. My own needs became non-existent. I owned 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts for my receptionist job, and a couple of t-shirts for home. When my shoes developed holes, I placed cardboard inserts inside rather than buying new ones. I walked to work most days, regardless of weather, to save the bus fare. On particularly harsh winter days when walking was impossible, I'd feel guilty about the $4 spent on transportation that could have gone toward Heather's needs. During those early years, I made a solemn promise to myself: Heather would never feel less than. Despite our circumstances, I was determined she would have opportunities. When her preschool announced a field trip that cost $25, I skipped lunches for a week to afford it. When she needed a costume for the school play, I stayed up all night after my cleaning shift to hand sew it from discounted fabric. There was pride in my work ethic, even if the jobs themselves weren't glamorous. At the office building I cleaned, I became known for my thoroughness. The employees would sometimes leave notes thanking the cleaning lady for finding and saving important documents that had fallen behind desks. They didn't know my name, but their appreciation for my work gave me a small sense of dignity. My closest friend through these difficult years was Laura Jenkins, a fellow single mother I met at Heather's daycare. Laura worked as a nurse and understood the exhaustion of raising a child alone while working demanding jobs. On rare Sundays when we were both off, we would take our daughters to the public park, sharing simple picnics while the girls played. Laura witnessed every sacrifice, every tear, and every small triumph as I slowly paid down David's debts. "You're the strongest person I know," Laura told me once, as we watched the girls on the swings. "Most people would have crumbled under half of what you're dealing with." I didn't feel strong. Most nights, I would collapse into bed with muscles aching from scrubbing floors and emptying countless trash bins, only to lie awake worrying about how I would afford Heather's growing needs. But each morning, seeing her innocent face gave me the strength to continue. Despite our financial struggles, I was determined to save for Heather's future. I opened a small savings account when she was 5, depositing just $5 a week at first. As years passed and I was promoted to office manager at the receptionist job, I increased the amount, always prioritizing this fund over any personal comfort. By her 10th birthday, I had managed to save nearly $6,000, earmarked for her college education and, someday, her wedding. The first signs of trouble appeared when Heather entered middle school. Her friends began wearing name-brand clothes and carrying the latest gadgets. Heather's second-hand wardrobe, carefully selected from thrift stores and supplemented with my amateur sewing, suddenly became a source of embarrassment. "Mom, can't I just get one pair of real Levi's?" she begged after coming home in tears one day. "Everyone knows my jeans are from Goodwill." I spent an entire month's discretionary budget on those jeans, eating nothing but ramen noodles for weeks to make up the difference. The smile on her face seemed worth it at the time, but it only opened the floodgates to more requests, more comparisons, more dissatisfaction with our modest lifestyle. By 8th grade, Heather had stopped inviting friends over entirely, preferring to visit their larger homes in better neighborhoods. When I asked why, she blurted out, "Because I'm tired of explaining why we live like this. Why can't we have a normal house like everyone else?" Her words stung like a physical blow, but I swallowed my hurt. "We're doing the best we can right now, sweetheart," I explained. "And this apartment has been a good home to us." She rolled her eyes in that way that only teenagers can perfect. "Whatever. Just don't expect me to bring anyone else here." That night, after Heather went to bed, I cried silently into my pillow, wondering if all my sacrifices would ever be enough. Heather's academic abilities became apparent in high school. Despite our financial limitations, she thrived in her studies, particularly in mathematics and economics. Her guidance counselor, Mr. Brennan, took special interest in her potential and helped her apply for scholarships to colleges that would have otherwise been far beyond our reach. When the acceptance letter arrived from Westfield University, a prestigious private college, along with a substantial academic scholarship, I felt a surge of validation. All those nights working while other parents relaxed, all those extras I'd gone without, had contributed to this moment. Heather would have opportunities one never did. "I'm so proud of you," I told her, fighting back tears as we celebrated with a rare dinner out at a modest family restaurant. "You've worked so hard for this." Heather was excited but already looking beyond me. "Westfield has connections to all the top companies. Ashley's sister went there and got hired by Goldman Sachs right after graduation. The scholarship covered tuition, but not room and board or books. I took out a small loan and increased my hours at the cleaning job to cover the difference, determined that Heather wouldn't need to work during her studies as I had done. The transformation in my daughter began almost immediately after she moved into her dormitory. During her first visit home for Thanksgiving, I barely recognized her. Her hair was highlighted in an expensive-looking style, her speech peppered with sophisticated terms I had to ask her to explain, and her clothing bore labels I'd only seen in magazines. "How did you afford all this?" I asked, gesturing to her new cashmere sweater. "Everyone dresses like this," she replied dismissively. "I can't show up looking like a scholarship charity case." I later discovered she had opened a credit card, something I had specifically warned her against, given our family history with debt. When I confronted her, she became defensive. "You don't understand what it's like there, Mom. Everyone comes from money. Their parents are doctors and executives and politicians." "And what do you tell them about your mom?" I asked quietly. Her hesitation told me everything. "I just say you work in an office," she finally admitted, unable to meet my eyes. The pain of that moment was sharp, but I told myself it was normal for college students to distance themselves from their parents. This was part of growing up, of establishing her own identity. I swallowed my hurt and continued supporting her, sending care packages I could barely afford and listening to her increasingly rare calls. During her sophomore year, Heather began mentioning new friends with familiar last names, children of prominent families whose names I recognized from newspapers. There was Bradley, whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels, Jennifer, whose mother was a state senator, and others from similarly privileged backgrounds. When Parents' Weekend approached, I saved for months to afford the trip, excited to see where my daughter had been living and learning. 2 days before I was set to visit, Heather called. "Mom, about this weekend, it's actually not a good time," she said, her voice tinged with what sounded like embarrassment. "Midterms are coming up, and I'll be studying the whole time." "I don't mind," I assured her. "I could bring you some home-cooked meals to keep in your mini fridge. I won't get in your way." "That's not." "Look, the dorms are really small, and my roommate has her parents staying in a hotel suite. It would be awkward." "I could get a hotel," I offered, though I had budgeted only for gas and had planned to sleep in my car. Heather sighed. "Can we just reschedule?" "And Mom, if you do come another time, maybe don't wear your work clothes? My friends' parents all dress really professional." The call ended with my agreement to postpone, but something fundamental had shifted. My daughter was ashamed of me, not just my job or our financial situation, but me personally. During her junior year, Heather mentioned a new boyfriend named James Brooks. Unlike her previous college relationships, this one seemed serious from the start. James was a law student, came from a wealthy Connecticut family, and had already secured a position at a prestigious firm following graduation. His father is a federal judge, and his mother runs a charitable foundation, Heather told me during a rare phone call. They have a summer home in the Hamptons where we spent spring break. "He sounds impressive," I said carefully. "When will I get to meet him?" "Soon," she replied vaguely. "He's really busy with law review and interviews." That soon stretched into months. When I was finally introduced to James during a brief coffee meeting near campus, I understood why. James was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable as Heather gave him the sanitized version of my life, describing me as working in office management and carefully omitting my second job or our years in the Riverdale apartment. James was handsome in a conventional way, with the confident demeanor of someone who had never worried about money. He spoke about his family's connections and his career plans with the certainty of someone whose path had been cleared long before he set foot on it. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Thompson," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Heather speaks highly of you." I wondered what exactly she had told him, given her reluctance to share the reality of our lives. As graduation approached, I noticed Heather's calls became even less frequent, and when we did speak, she shared fewer details about her life. She spent holidays with James's family rather than coming home, citing the networking opportunities available at their gatherings. "Judge Brooks knows everyone in the legal community," she explained. "And they have partners from James's firm over for New Year's Eve." Despite the growing distance, I continued supporting her financially when needed. When her laptop broke before final exams, I sent money for a new one. When she needed professional clothing for interviews, I dipped into my savings. Each time, her thanks seemed more perfunctory, as if my assistance was expected rather than appreciated. Laura, who had watched Heather grow up alongside her own daughter Bethany, noticed the change during a rare visit when both girls were home. "She's different," Laura observed after Heather left early to meet friends from her university circle, as she now called them. "It's like she's playing a role in some movie about rich people." "She's just finding her way," I defended, though privately I shared Laura's concerns. "College changes people." "Not Bethany," Laura pointed out. Her daughter was attending the state university on a partial scholarship, working part-time at the campus bookstore, and remained the same good-natured girl she'd always been. She's still proud of where she came from. The engagement announcement came via text message during Heather's first year working at a marketing firm in the city. James had proposed with a diamond ring that, from the photo, I estimated cost more than my annual salary. "We're thinking June at the Westbrook Country Club," Heather informed me during our subsequent phone call. "James's mother knows the event coordinator." My heart sank at the mention of such an exclusive venue, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "Whatever you want, honey. I've been saving for your wedding since you were little." There was a pause before Heather replied, "That's sweet, Mom. But this will probably be more than you've saved." "Don't worry about it. "Heather, I want to contribute," I insisted, pride making my voice firm. "This is important to me." What I didn't tell her was that her wedding fund had grown to just over $45,000, the result of 22 years of consistent saving, careful investing, and countless sacrifices. It represented thousands of extra shifts, years without vacations, and a lifetime of putting her needs before my own. "Well, if you're sure," she finally said, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor by accepting. "I'll connect you with the wedding planner." "But Mom, this needs to be a really special event. James's family has connections, and a lot of important people will be there." As we ended the call, I sat in my small apartment, nicer than our first place in Riverdale but still modest, and wondered if anything I could provide would ever be enough for the woman my daughter had become. The reality of Heather's wedding expectations became clear during our first meeting with Veronica, the wedding planner. We sat in an upscale cafe with marble tabletops and $12 coffees, reviewing what Heather described as a reasonable budget. "So we've estimated about $85,000 for the basics," Veronica said, scrolling through her tablet. "That covers the Westbrook venue, catering for 200 guests, mid-range floral arrangements, and a photographer from Astley Studios." I nearly choked on my coffee. 85,000? For the basics? Heather shot me a warning look before turning to Veronica with a practiced smile. "We might need to make some adjustments. My mother is contributing 45,000, and James and I will cover the rest." I felt simultaneously relieved that she was contributing and dismayed that my entire savings was considered just over half of a basic wedding budget. As Veronica continued outlining costs, my mind whirled with calculations. My entire contribution would barely cover the venue and catering. The extras Heather wanted, designer dress, premium open bar, live band, videographer, welcome baskets for out-of-town guests, would add thousands more. "I can increase my contribution," I found myself saying, not wanting to disappoint her. "I could take some extra shifts." Heather looked momentarily uncomfortable before her expression smoothed. "If you want to, Mom. But don't overextend yourself." That evening, I called my cleaning supervisor and requested additional weekend assignments. At 53, the physical toll of scrubbing floors and emptying trash was harder than it had been in my 30s, but I was determined to give Heather the wedding she wanted. Over the following weeks, Heather's vision for her wedding grew increasingly elaborate. The guest list expanded to include influential connections from James's work and family circles. The mid-range floral arrangements were upgraded to premium designs. The wedding cake, initially planned as a 3-tier creation, became a 5-tier masterpiece with hand-painted fondant designed to match the reception decor. Each change came with a text or email informing me of the slight increase to my expected contribution. I said yes to each one, even as I calculated how many additional hours of cleaning I would need to work. My involvement in actual planning decisions, however, was minimal. Heather scheduled most vendor meetings during my working hours, making it impossible for me to attend. When I could participate, my suggestions were politely but firmly dismissed. "Mom, I know you're trying to help, but buffet-style service isn't appropriate for this type of wedding," Heather explained when I suggested a way to reduce catering costs. "James's family would find it tacky." That word, tacky, became a common refrain. My idea for handwritten place cards, tacky. My suggestion to use seasonal local flowers, tacky. My offer to ask Laura's sister, a talented baker, to create the wedding cake, laughably tacky. I began to feel less like the mother of the bride and more like a silent financial backer to a production I barely understood. The dynamic became even more uncomfortable when I finally met James's parents, Judge Howard and Kathleen Brooks, during a dinner at an exclusive restaurant where a single entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. Judge Brooks was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to having his opinions respected. Kathleen was slim and elegant, her subtle jewelry and designer outfit speaking of generational wealth rather than new money. "So, Sarah," Judge Brooks said after introductions, "Heather tells us you work in office management." Yes, I replied, grateful that Heather had at least acknowledged my day job. I've been with the same company for nearly 15 years now. How nice to have that stability, Kathleen commented, in a tone that suggested such work was quaint but beneath serious consideration. And you're managing to contribute to the wedding? That's very sweet. Actually, Mom is covering about half the costs, Heather interjected quickly, clearly trying to elevate my status in their eyes. Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Well, we're handling the rehearsal dinner at the Peninsula, of course. 4 courses, premium wines. Nearly $30,000 for just that evening, but connections must be maintained. The comment was clearly meant to establish that while my contribution might be substantial to me, it was pocket change in their world. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around people and places I didn't know, fellow judges, politicians, executives, exclusive clubs, and vacation properties. Whenever I attempted to join the conversation, there would be a brief acknowledgement before the topic shifted back to their sphere of influence. We're thinking of having the welcome bags include local artisanal products, Kathleen mentioned at one point. There's a wonderful little shop in Westbrook that curates gift collections. That sounds lovely, I ventured. I know someone who makes beautiful handcrafted soaps that could be a nice addition. There was a moment of awkward silence before Kathleen smiled tightly. How creative. But we've already selected Harrington's for the toiletries. They're known for their organic lavender products. After dinner, in the privacy of my car, I finally allowed myself to cry. The divide between Heather's new world and mine had never felt so vast and unbridgeable. When I confided my feelings to Laura during our weekly coffee meetup, she listened with characteristic empathy. You've given that girl everything, she said, her nurse's hands wrapping comfortingly around her mug. Your entire life has been about making hers better. If she can't see that, the problem is with her, not you. I just want to be part of her big day, I admitted. But I feel like an outsider. Have you told her how you feel? I shook my head. She's under enough stress with the wedding planning. And I don't want to make things awkward with James's family. Laura gave me a pointed look. From what you've told me, things are already plenty awkward. Sometimes mothers and daughters need honest conversations, even difficult ones. I promised to consider it, but the opportunity for that conversation never seemed to arrive. Heather was increasingly busy with work, wedding planning, and social obligations with James's circle. Our interactions became primarily transactional, discussions about payments, vendor contracts, and logistics. The final blow came during what should have been a special mother-daughter moment, wedding dress shopping. I had dreamed of this day since Heather was small, imagining the emotional experience of helping my daughter choose the gown she would wear on one of the most important days of her life. Instead, I received a text message the evening before our scheduled appointment, change of plans. Going with Jennifer and Kathleen tomorrow instead. Their schedule opened up, and Jennifer knows the designer personally. We'll send you photos of what I choose. Love you. When the photos arrived the next day, they showed Heather beaming in a stunning custom gown that I later discovered cost nearly $20,000. She looked beautiful but utterly unrecognizable from the little girl I had raised, transformed into someone who belonged in the glossy society pages of magazines I would only ever see in waiting rooms. That evening, I received an email from the bridal salon with an invoice for the dress, clearly expecting my payment despite my absence from the selection process. As I entered my credit card information, authorizing the largest single purchase of my life for a dress I hadn't even seen in person, I wondered if anything of my daughter remained in the woman who would wear it. The night before the wedding, a rehearsal dinner was held at the Peninsula Hotel's private dining room, just as Judge Brooks had promised. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, illuminating tables adorned with arrangements of white orchids and silver candelabras. The meal featured imported delicacies and wines whose names I couldn't pronounce. I was seated at a table with distant relatives of the Brooks family rather than at the main table with Heather, James, and his parents. Throughout the evening, I watched my daughter laugh and converse effortlessly with people who moved through life with the ease of privilege, wondering when she had learned to navigate this world that remained so foreign to me. At the end of the evening, as guests began to depart, I approached Heather, hoping for a moment of connection before her wedding day. "Everything looks beautiful," I told her. "Are you excited for tomorrow?" "Mostly just ready for it to be over," she replied, checking her phone. "The planning has been exhausting. I remember when you were little, you used to wrap my old curtain shears around yourself and pretend you were a bride," I said, trying to reach back to the daughter I knew. Heather glanced around as if worried someone might overhear this glimpse into our modest past. "Mom, that was a long time ago." "I know. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." The words weren't quite what I meant to say, but they were true nonetheless. She gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. "Thanks for everything, Mom. I should go check on James. The car is picking us up early tomorrow for hair and makeup." As she walked away to rejoin her fiancé and future in-laws, I stood alone in the opulent room, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had cost more than a year of my combined salaries, feeling like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding festivities. The morning of Heather's wedding dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains of my budget hotel room located 15 minutes from the Westbrook Country Club. I had splurged on a night's stay rather than making the hour-long drive from my apartment on the wedding day, wanting to be well-rested and present for every moment. As I sat at the small vanity, applying makeup with extra care, I allowed myself to hope that today might bridge the growing gap between Heather and me. Weddings were emotional times, after all. Perhaps in the midst of this milestone, she would remember all we had been through together, just the two of us against the world. I had purchased a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with delicate beading around the neckline, the most expensive garment I'd ever bought for myself at just under $300. The saleswoman had assured me it was appropriate for a mother of the bride, elegant without being flashy. I paired it with sensible but nice heels and pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, the only piece of family jewelry I possessed. When I arrived at the bridal suite within the country club's main building, I found it bustling with activity. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and photographers moved efficiently around the space, while Heather's bridesmaids, most of whom I had never met, lounged in matching silk robes, champagne flutes in hand. Heather sat in a chair before a large mirror, a stylist arranging her hair in an elaborate updo. She caught my reflection and turned. "Mom, you're early," she said, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "We're still getting ready." "I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything," I replied, suddenly feeling awkward standing in the doorway with my small gift bag in hand. "You look beautiful already." She gave me a quick, distracted smile before turning back to the mirror. "Thanks. You can put your things over there. We have mimosas if you want one." I set my purse down and took a seat in the corner, feeling like an intruder despite being the mother of the bride. The bridesmaids continued their conversations about people and events I didn't know, occasionally glancing my way with polite but curious expressions. After about 20 minutes of sitting silently, Kathleen Brooks arrived, dressed in an obviously designer outfit in a complementary shade of champagne that coordinated perfectly with the wedding colors. The bridesmaids immediately made space for her in the center of the activity. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant," she gushed to Heather, air-kissing both cheeks. "The hair is divine, exactly right for the Marchesa gown." She turned and finally noticed me in my corner. "Sarah, good morning. That's a nice color on you." Her gaze lingered momentarily on my dress before she turned back to Heather. "The florist just showed me the arrangements. They've exceeded all expectations." As the morning progressed, I remained on the periphery of the preparations. When the photographer arranged group shots of Heather with her bridesmaids and Kathleen, I stepped forward, assuming I would be included. "Oh," the photographer said, looking uncertain. "I was told to get the bride with the wedding party and Mrs. Brooks first. We can do mother of the bride photos after, if there's time." I retreated, trying to mask my hurt as I watched Kathleen take what should have been my place beside my daughter. The ceremony itself was picture-perfect, held in the country club's garden pavilion overlooking manicured lawns and a shimmering lake. 200 guests filled the white chairs adorned with lush floral arrangements. A string quartet played as Heather walked down the aisle on Judge Brooks's arm, another tradition I had silently relinquished when Heather explained it would be awkward to have her mother give her away instead of a father figure. From my seat in the front row, I watched my daughter pledge her life to James, her face radiant with happiness. Despite everything, tears of joy and pride filled my eyes. Whatever our difficulties, I had raised a strong, successful woman who was marrying a man she loved. That was what mattered, I told myself. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace before moving into the grand ballroom for dinner. I found myself seated at a table with distant relatives and a few colleagues from Heather's work, not at the head table with the wedding party and James's parents. "You must be so proud," said the woman beside me, a co-worker of Heather's I'd never met. "She's such a remarkable young woman." "I am," I agreed, grateful for the opening to talk about my daughter. "She's always been determined. Even as a little girl." "Oh, look, they're starting the speeches," the woman interrupted, turning toward the head table. The traditional toasts began with the best man, followed by the maid of honor. Both spoke of James and Heather as the perfect couple, destined for success and happiness. James's father spoke next, welcoming Heather to their family with warm words about her intelligence and grace, making no mention of her background or family. Then the microphone was passed to Heather and James for their thank you speech. They thanked the guests for coming, James's parents for their generosity and guidance, the wedding party for their support, and various friends for their presence on this special day. As they concluded, someone from the back called out, "What about your mom, Heather?" There was an awkward pause as Heather seemed momentarily flustered. She glanced in my direction before forcing a laugh. "Oh, of course. I was getting to that. Thank you to my mother for coming today." She paused, and something in her expression changed. A hardening around the eyes that I recognized from her teenage years when she was embarrassed by our circumstances. "Mom kept things clean for us growing up." There was a ripple of uncertain laughter from the crowd. "No, really," Heather continued, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard in public before. "She's the best cleaning lady in town. Office buildings all over the city have her to thank for their spotless bathrooms." The laughter grew more pronounced as guests looked in my direction. I felt heat rush to my face as hundreds of eyes turned toward me. "If anyone needs cleaning tips, just ask Sarah Thompson, she's an expert at getting out tough stains and stretching a dollar." James looked uncomfortable beside her, placing a hand on her arm as if to stop her, but the damage was done. My years of sacrifice, reduced to a punchline for the amusement of people who had never known what it meant to struggle. I sat frozen, a tight smile fixed on my face as my vision blurred with unshed tears. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to stand up and walk out, to escape the pitying and amused glances being cast my way. But causing a scene would only make things worse, would only confirm for these people that I didn't belong in their world. So I remained seated, hands clenched in my lap beneath the table, as the reception continued around me. The band began playing, and couples moved to the dance floor. I declined offers to dance, claiming a headache, and instead watched from my seat as Heather and James moved effortlessly among their guests, the perfect couple in their perfect world. During a quiet moment, I slipped away to the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. In the elegant marble bathroom, I stood before the mirror, examining the face of a woman who had given everything she had to a daughter who was ashamed of her very existence. "Are you all right?" I turned to find an older woman watching me with concern. I recognized her as one of the guests from James's side, though we hadn't been introduced. "Yes, thank you," I said quickly, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. "Just an emotional day. Weddings, you know." She nodded sympathetically. "They certainly are. I'm Helen, by the way. Table 14. "Sarah," I replied. "Mother of the bride." "I know," she said gently. "My husband works with James. We've heard a lot about Heather." "All good things, I hope," I managed, attempting humor. Helen's kind eyes held mine. "Very good things." which is why I was surprised by that speech. It didn't seem to match the young woman my husband has described. I shrugged, unwilling to criticize my daughter to a stranger. It was just a joke. Some jokes cut deeper than others, Helen observed. For what it's worth, I raised 3 children working as a school janitor after my first husband died. There's no shame in honest work. Before I could respond, the door opened as other guests entered, and Helen squeezed my arm gently before leaving. Her kindness nearly undid me, but I took several deep breaths, reapplied my lipstick, and returned to the reception, determined to make it through the evening with dignity. I found my seat again, now occupied only by an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as James's great-uncle. The dance floor was crowded, the celebration in full swing. From my vantage point, I could see Heather laughing with her friends, seemingly unbothered by the humiliation she had inflicted on her mother just an hour earlier. As I sat there, feeling more alone than I had in years, the wedding coordinator approached the band, whispering something to the leader. The music faded, and the band leader spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special request for a toast from Mr. Harold Wilson, CEO of Berkshire Hamilton Law, where our groom has recently made junior partner." A distinguished man in his 60s approached the microphone. I vaguely recognized him from the ceremony as one of the more important-looking guests, though we hadn't been introduced. As he took the microphone, I prepared myself for another glowing tribute to the couple and their bright future, another reminder of the world that had claimed my daughter and left me behind. I had no idea that this man's words were about to change everything. Harold Wilson cut an impressive figure as he stood at the microphone, tall and distinguished with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His tailored tuxedo and subtle gold cufflinks spoke of wealth that was substantial but not ostentatious. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. "For those who don't know me, I'm Harold Wilson, CEO of Berkshire Hamilton Law, where our groom James has recently distinguished himself as one of our most promising young attorneys." There was polite applause, and James nodded appreciatively from his seat at the head table. "It's customary at these events to offer advice to the newlyweds or share anecdotes about their relationship," Harold continued. "And I will get to that. But first, I'd like to speak about something else, the foundations upon which successful lives and marriages are built." A hush fell over the room as guests sensed this would not be a typical wedding toast. Many of you know my story. I grew up in a housing project in South Boston, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table. I was the first in my family to attend college, much less law school. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "What many don't know is how I paid my way through school." Harold straightened his tie slightly before continuing. "I worked nights as a janitor at the very law school I attended by day. For 4 years, I cleaned classrooms where I would sit as a student hours later. I emptied the trash bins of professors who would later write my recommendations." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. I found myself leaning forward, unexpectedly moved by this successful man's acknowledgement of his humble beginnings. The reason I share this tonight is because, for the past 5 years, I've had the privilege of observing another hardworking individual who reminds me very much of my mother, someone whose dedication and sacrifice has directly contributed to the success we're celebrating today. His gaze found me in the crowd, and my heart seemed to stop. Sarah Thompson has cleaned the offices of Berkshire Hamilton Law 3 nights a week for years. Many of you might not know her name, but if you've ever visited our firm, you benefited from her meticulous work. Heather's face had gone pale at the head table, her eyes widening as she realized where Harold's speech was heading. "I often work late," Harold continued. "Corporate law isn't a 9-to-5 profession. And over the years, Sarah and I have had many conversations as she worked and I burned the midnight oil. I learned that she raised her daughter single-handedly after being abandoned by her husband. That she worked 2 full-time jobs for most of that time. That every extra dollar went into a fund for her daughter's education and future." The room had gone completely silent. I felt heat rise to my face as hundreds of eyes turned toward me, but this time the gazes held something different than before, not pity or amusement, but dawning realization. What struck me most about Sarah wasn't just her work ethic, though that is exemplary. It was that despite exhaustion that would crush most people, she always spoke of her daughter with unmitigated pride. "My Heather is so smart," she would say. "My Heather is going to have opportunities one never had." Harold's voice grew warmer. I heard about every accomplishment, every milestone. Sarah would bring in newspaper clippings when Heather made the dean's list. She kept a photo of Heather's college graduation in her cleaning cart. I closed my eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the unexpected public acknowledgement of all those quiet years of effort and pride. When Sarah mentioned her daughter was engaged to one of our junior attorneys, I was intrigued by the coincidence. When I realized it was James Brooks, one of our most promising talents, I understood that the drive for excellence I saw in him had found its match in Heather. Harold turned to face the head table directly. "James, the meticulous attention to detail that makes you such an outstanding attorney? Heather, the remarkable work ethic that has accelerated your marketing career? Those qualities don't materialize from nowhere. They're inherited and learned from people who demonstrate them every day, often without recognition or applause." I dared to glance at Heather. She sat rigid in her seat, her expression unreadable, though James beside her looked increasingly uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between his boss and his new wife. "Success isn't measured by the title on your business card or the address on your mailbox," Harold continued. "It's measured by the obstacles you overcome and the integrity with which you face life's challenges." He raised his champagne glass. "So tonight, I'd like to propose a toast, not just to Heather and James and their future together, though I wish them every happiness. My toast is to Sarah Thompson, whose years of sacrifice and unwavering support have made this day possible." The room erupted in applause as Harold gestured toward me. People stood, turning in my direction with glasses raised. Through tear-blurred vision, I saw James's parents exchange glances before reluctantly standing as well. To Sarah, Harold concluded, whose definition of love has always been putting her daughter's needs before her own. May we all aspire to such generosity of spirit. To Sarah, the crowd echoed, and I found myself acknowledged by a room full of people who, minutes earlier, had laughed at my expense. As guests returned to their conversations and the band resumed playing, Harold made his way through the crowd to my table. He extended his hand formally. "I hope I didn't overstep, Sarah," he said quietly. "But some truths deserve to be spoken aloud." "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Harold smiled. "No thanks necessary. My mother would have done the same for me." He glanced toward the head table, where Heather was engaged in intense conversation with James. "Family relationships are complicated. Sometimes we need reminders of where we came from." As Harold moved on to speak with other guests, I found myself approached by people who had previously overlooked me, James's colleagues, friends of the Brooks family, even distant relatives who suddenly discovered they wanted to know me better. "Your daughter is remarkable," said one woman who introduced herself as a partner at James's firm. "Now I understand where she gets her determination." "I had no idea," said another guest, a college friend of Heather's. "She never mentioned. I mean, she always seemed so polished?" I supplied with a small smile. That was the goal. For her to fit in anywhere. As the evening progressed, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People who had previously kept their distance now made efforts to include me in conversations. I was invited to join a group on the dance floor, and when I declined, citing my aching feet after a long week, there were knowing nods rather than dismissive shrugs. Most notably, I observed Kathleen Brooks watching me from across the room, her expression conflicted. Eventually, she approached, champagne flute in hand. "Sarah," she began stiffly. Harold's speech was illuminating. I waited, unsure where this conversation was headed. "James thinks the world of Heather," she continued. "He says she's the most driven person he's ever met. I suppose we now know why." "She's always been determined," I replied neutrally. Kathleen glanced around before lowering her voice. "Howard and we may have misjudged the situation. Your contribution to this wedding was clearly significant. It wasn't quite an apology, but from what I had learned of Kathleen Brooks over the past months, it was likely the closest I would get. We all want what's best for Heather and James, I said diplomatically. She nodded, seemingly relieved by my response. Perhaps we could have lunch sometime. Now that the children are married, we should get to know each other better. As Kathleen returned to her husband's side, I remained at my table, processing the remarkable turn the evening had taken. The humiliation of Heather's speech had been countered by Harold's unexpected championing of my contribution to her success. But the person I most needed to speak with, my daughter, remained distant, occasionally casting uncertain glances in my direction but making no move to approach me. The hurt of her public mockery still stung, Harold's intervention notwithstanding. As the reception began winding down, guests departing with favor bags and tired smiles, I knew that while Harold's speech had changed how others saw me, the fundamental rift between Heather and me remained unaddressed. I gathered my purse, preparing to slip away quietly, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find James standing there, his expression troubled. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah, he corrected himself. Do you have a moment? I nodded, and he guided me to a quiet corner of the now half-empty ballroom. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice low and sincere. I had no idea about everything you've done for Heather. She never told me the full story. It's not your fault, I assured him. Heather and we've grown apart in recent years. James ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, momentarily disrupting its perfection. Still, what happened tonight with her speech was inexcusable. I want you to know I had nothing to do with that. I know you didn't, I said, touched by his concern. Mr. Wilson is a man I deeply respect, James continued. His opinion matters to me, professionally and personally. And after hearing him speak about you tonight, I realize there's a lot about my wife's background that I should have asked about sooner. I studied this young man, privileged, ambitious, but perhaps more perceptive than I had given him credit for. Every family has its complications, I offered. Yes, but not every family has someone who sacrificed everything for their child's future. James straightened his shoulders. Heather and I need to talk. Really talk. And I think you and she need to as well. Before I could respond, I saw Heather approaching, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. James squeezed my hand briefly before moving to intercept his bride, whispering something in her ear that made her frown, then nod reluctantly. As the newlyweds prepared to depart amid a shower of rose petals and well wishes, I made my way toward the exit, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter than I had felt in years. Harold Wilson's unexpected intervention had given voice to the story I had never demanded be told, acknowledging the worth of my contribution not just to this wedding, but to the remarkable woman my daughter had become. Whether Heather would ever truly recognize that contribution remained to be seen. But for tonight, at least, others had seen me, not just as the cleaning lady or Heather's embarrassing mother, but as a woman whose work and sacrifices deserved respect. As I drove back to my hotel room, I realized that while the evening had not unfolded as I had hoped or expected, it had perhaps given me something I needed even more than my daughter's public acknowledgement, a reminder of my own value, reflected back to me through the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had once walked a similar path. The day after the wedding, I awoke in my hotel room with a strange mixture of emotions. The public humiliation of Heather's speech still stung, but Harold Wilson's unexpected intervention had transformed how the wedding guests, and perhaps even the Brooks family, viewed me. More importantly, it had reminded me of my own worth, independent of my daughter's approval. I had planned to check out early and drive home, giving Heather and James space as they prepared for their honeymoon departure that evening. They were scheduled to leave for a 2-week tour of the Mediterranean, a wedding gift from James's parents. My role in the wedding festivities was officially complete. As I packed my single overnight bag, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Thompson, this is James. Could you meet Heather and me at our apartment before we leave for the airport? There are some things we need to discuss. 2 p.m. if possible. I stared at the message, my heart racing. This was unexpected. I had assumed any conversation with Heather would come after their return, if at all. The formality of James's text suggested this wasn't a casual farewell visit. I replied with a simple "I'll be there" and finished packing with renewed anxiety. The apartment Heather and James shared was in an upscale building downtown, the kind with a doorman and a concierge service. I had visited only once before, when Heather had given me a brief, perfunctory tour shortly after they moved in together. After checking out, I killed time at a nearby cafe, attempting to eat a sandwich that tasted like cardboard in my nervous state. What did they want to discuss? Was James going to mediate some kind of reconciliation? Or was this Heather's opportunity to express resentment about Harold's speech overshadowing her perfect wedding? At precisely 2 p.m., I knocked on the door of Unit 1507. James answered immediately, dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt rather than the formal attire of the previous day. His expression was serious but not unwelcoming. "Sarah, thank you for coming," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Heather's in the living room." The apartment was as I remembered it, sleek, modern, and expensively furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city skyline. Heather sat on one of the white leather sofas, still in pajamas despite the afternoon hour, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked younger without her wedding makeup, more like the daughter I remembered. "Mom," she acknowledged without rising. Her tone was neutral, giving away nothing. "Hello, Heather," I replied, remaining standing near the entryway, suddenly unsure of my place in this pristine space. "Congratulations again. The wedding was beautiful." An awkward silence fell. James cleared his throat. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to an armchair across from Heather. "Can I get you anything to drink?" "No, thank you," I said, perching on the edge of the chair, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. James took a seat beside Heather, his posture straight and formal. "I asked you here because after last night, I think there are some important things that need to be said before Heather and I leave for our honeymoon." Heather shot him a look that I couldn't quite interpret, part irritation, part something else. Vulnerability, perhaps? "What happened at the reception," James continued, "was not acceptable. Mr. Wilson's speech made me realize there's a history here I wasn't fully aware of." "James," Heather interrupted, her voice tight. "I told you we could discuss this after we get back." "No," he said firmly, surprising me with his tone. "This needs to be addressed now. Your mother deserves that much." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Sarah, I want to apologize for not knowing the full extent of your contributions to Heather's life. She had mentioned you worked hard as a single mother, but the details were minimized." "It wasn't your responsibility to know," I said quietly. "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But as someone who loves Heather, I should have asked more questions. And as someone raised with certain values about respecting family, I should have insisted on greater involvement from you in the wedding planning." Heather stood abruptly, moving to the window with her back to us. "Is this why you brought her here? To gang up on me the day after our wedding?" The hurt in her voice was evident, but so was something else, a defensive anger that I recognized from her teenage years whenever she felt cornered or exposed. "No one is ganging up on you," James replied calmly. "But after what Mr. Wilson said. Harold Wilson doesn't know anything about my relationship with my mother." Heather snapped, turning to face us. "He sees her for what, a few hours a week while she cleans his precious office? He has no right to interfere in our family matters." "He wasn't interfering," I said, finding my voice at last. "He was acknowledging work that has gone unacknowledged for a very long time." Heather's eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it, I detected a flicker of shame. "So now I'm the ungrateful daughter? Is that it? The selfish, social climbing brat who's embarrassed by her cleaning lady mother?" "I never said that," I replied, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. "But your speech last night, you humiliated me in front of everyone, Heather. You reduced 25 years of sacrifice to a joke about cleaning bathrooms." It was just a stupid joke. I was nervous, everyone was staring at me, and it just came out wrong. Things don't come out wrong unless they're in there to begin with, I said quietly. The room fell silent. James looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but determined to see this conversation through. Heather, he said finally. Why didn't you tell me your mother worked as a cleaner at my firm? Or that she was paying for half our wedding? Heather wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. Because I knew how it would look. Your parents already thought I wasn't good enough for you, with my new money marketing job and state school undergrad degree. If they knew my mother cleaned offices at night. My parents are snobs, James acknowledged bluntly. But they're not the ones I married. I married you. And I thought I knew who you were. The implied question hung in the air. Heather's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it was like, she said, her voice breaking. Growing up with nothing, wearing second-hand clothes, living in that awful apartment. Do you know what it's like to have your friends refuse to come over because your home is too embarrassing? To lie about why you can't go on school trips or buy yearbooks. I do know, I said, rising from my chair. I know exactly what it's like to feel less than. The difference is, I never had the luxury of pretending to be someone else. I was too busy making sure you had opportunities one never had. I never asked you to sacrifice everything. Heather cried. That's what parents do, I replied simply. They give their children what they need, not what they ask for. Well, maybe what I needed was a mother who could give me more than just material support. Maybe I needed someone who could teach me how to fit into the world I was trying to enter. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. You think I didn't want to give you more? You think I chose to work 80-hour weeks instead of attending your school events or taking you on vacations? Everything I did was so you wouldn't have to live the life I lived. Years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings poured out as we faced each other across the elegant living room that symbolized everything I had worked to make possible for my daughter. And now you have everything I wanted for you, I continued, my voice softening. Education. Career. Financial security. A partner who loves you. But somewhere along the way, you decided that the person who helped you achieve those things was an embarrassment to be hidden away. Heather sank back onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said gently. Not just last night, but for years now. Every time you introduced me as working in an office instead of acknowledging both my jobs. Every time you excluded me from decisions about a wedding I was paying for. Every time you made it clear I wasn't sophisticated enough for your new life. James, who had remained silent during our exchange, finally spoke. Heather, I fell in love with you because of your drive, your intelligence, and your compassion. But what I saw last night wasn't the woman I thought I married. Heather looked up at him, alarmed. What are you saying? I'm saying that how you treat the people who love you says more about you than any job title or address ever could. And I'm wondering if I really know the person I just committed my life to. His words seemed to cut through Heather's defenses in a way mine couldn't. She looked stricken. James, you can't mean that. It was one stupid speech, one mistake. It's not just about the speech, he said, his voice gentle but firm. It's about the pattern your mother is describing. It's about values, Heather. The kind of values Mr. Wilson recognized in your mother, hard work, sacrifice, integrity, are the same values I thought you embodied. Heather buried her face in her hands. I don't know what you want from me. I moved to sit beside her on the sofa, leaving a careful distance between us. I don't want anything from you except honesty, Heather. About who you are, where you came from, and what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. She raised her tear-stained face. What does that mean? It means I won't be hidden away anymore, I said firmly. I won't pretend to be someone I'm not to make you comfortable with your new friends. I'm proud of the work I've done, all of it, to provide for us. If that's embarrassing to you, then we need to reconsider what role I'll play in your life. You're saying, what? That you'll disown me if I don't parade you around as my cleaning lady mom? Her tone held a hint of the defensive sarcasm I'd heard the night before. No, I replied calmly. I'm saying I deserve basic respect. I'm saying that moving forward, our relationship needs to be based on mutual acknowledgement of who we really are, not who you wish I was. James stood. I think your mother is being more than reasonable, considering everything that's happened. And I think you need to seriously reflect on your behavior, not just toward her but in general. Heather looked between us, suddenly seeming to realize she was outnumbered. So you're both against me now? This isn't about taking sides, James said. It's about doing what's right. And what's right is me groveling to apologize for one stupid joke. What's right, I interjected, is acknowledging the truth of our relationship, the good and the bad, and deciding together what happens next. But I won't be coming to family gatherings only to be seated at the back of the room or introduced vaguely as working in an office. I won't keep financing a lifestyle that I'm not allowed to be visibly connected to. My voice shook slightly, but I maintained eye contact with my daughter. I love you, Heather. That has never changed. But I've spent 25 years putting your needs first. It's time for me to honor my own needs as well. The room fell silent except for Heather's quiet sniffles. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. I don't know how to fix this. You start by being honest, James said gently. With yourself, with your mother, and with me. Heather nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Our flight is in 4 hours. Then you have some thinking to do during your honeymoon, I said, rising from the sofa and gathering my purse. When you get back, we can talk again, if you want to. As I moved toward the door, Heather suddenly stood and rushed over, wrapping her arms around me in an impulsive hug that reminded me of her childhood. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered against my shoulder. I really am. I returned the embrace cautiously, unsure if this was a genuine moment of contrition or simply an attempt to smooth things over before her trip. I know, honey. We'll figure it out. James walked me to the door. Thank you for coming, he said. And for being honest. Take care of her, I replied quietly. She's not as tough as she pretends to be. He nodded solemnly. I know. And Sarah? For what it's worth, I'm proud to have you as my mother-in-law. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I felt emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth to my daughter without minimizing my feelings to spare hers. Whether this would lead to healing or further estrangement remained to be seen, but I had taken the first step toward a more authentic relationship, or at least toward valuing myself enough to demand one. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. Now it was up to Heather to decide what would come next. As I walked to my car under the clear afternoon sky, I realized that regardless of her choice, I would be okay. Harold Wilson's unexpected championing of my worth had reminded me that my value wasn't dependent on my daughter's recognition of it, and that was perhaps the most important lesson of all. 3 months passed before I heard directly from Heather again. During that time, the only communication I received was a generic postcard from Santorini with both her and James's signatures, and a brief text message upon their return informing me they had arrived home safely. I responded to both with equal brevity, determined to give her the space to reflect on our confrontation without pressure from me. In those months, I made changes of my own. I reduced my cleaning shifts to 3 nights a week instead of 5, using the extra time to join a community book club I'd always been too exhausted to attend. I repainted my small apartment, replacing the functional beige walls with a soft blue that brightened the space. I even scheduled lunch with Laura once a week, rebuilding a friendship that had taken a back seat to my work schedule for too long. When Heather finally called to suggest meeting for lunch, I agreed without hesitation but with carefully managed expectations. We arranged to meet at a casual cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory for what promised to be a significant conversation. I arrived early, selecting a quiet table near the back where we could talk privately. When Heather walked in, I was struck by the subtle changes in her appearance. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair that had become her uniform in recent years. Instead, she wore simple jeans, a sweater, and minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a natural ponytail reminiscent of her college days. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me with visible nervousness. "Thanks for meeting me." Of course, I replied, noting the absence of the sleek, self-assured persona she had cultivated among James's circle. "You look well. How was the honeymoon?" "Beautiful," she said, fiddling with her napkin. "The islands were incredible. But honestly, it was complicated. James and I had a lot to talk about." "I imagine you did," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. A server interrupted to take our orders, simple sandwiches and iced tea for both of us, another departure from the elaborate lunches Heather had favored in recent years. After the server left, Heather took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone," she admitted. "A therapist. Since we got back." This surprised me. Heather had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary navel-gazing, a position that had frustrated me during her tumultuous teenage years. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "How is it going?" "It's hard," she admitted, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since the wedding. "Really hard. But necessary. Dr. Martens is helping me understand some things about myself that aren't particularly flattering." "Such as?" "Such as why I've been so ashamed of where I came from. Why I felt the need to reinvent myself so completely that I was willing to hurt the person who made everything possible for me." Her voice caught. "Why I treated you the way I did at the wedding." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I've been carrying this shame," she said quietly. "Not just about our financial situation growing up, but about feeling different from everyone else. Like I was an imposter in the world I wanted to belong to. And instead of owning that feeling and working through it, I projected it onto you." The honesty in her words touched me deeply. "I never wanted you to feel ashamed of where you came from, Heather." "I know," she replied, blinking back tears. "That was all me. Dr. Martens helped me see that my behavior wasn't really about you at all. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of being found out as not really belonging in James's world." Our food arrived, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. Neither of us made any move to eat. "The thing is," Heather continued after the server left, "James never cared about any of that. When we were dating, he told me he loved how different I was from the women he'd grown up around, how real and unpretentious I was." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "The irony is that by the time we got married, I'd become exactly what I thought he wanted, another polished, status-conscious person focused on appearances. But that was never what he fell in love with." "And now?" I asked gently. "Now we're working through it. James was pretty shaken after the wedding, after seeing that side of me. We've been going to couples therapy in addition to my individual sessions." She pushed her sandwich plate aside. "He's been incredibly supportive, but also firm about his expectations going forward." "Which are?" "Authenticity," she said simply. "In how I present myself, in how I treat others, in how I acknowledge where I came from." She reached across the table, hesitantly taking my hand. "Starting with how I treat you." I squeezed her fingers gently, encouraging her to continue. "Mom, I am so deeply ashamed of what I said at the wedding. Of how I've treated you for years now. There's no excuse for it. None." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've been trying to figure out how to apologize, but nothing seems adequate." "An apology is a start," I said, "but you're right that it doesn't erase what happened. Trust takes time to rebuild." She nodded, wiping her tears with her free hand. "I know. And I'm prepared for that. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever fully. But I want to try to make things right between us, if you're willing." "I'm willing," I assured her. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Heather took another deep breath. "There's something else you should know. I've been talking with Harold Wilson regularly since the wedding." This genuinely surprised me. Harold? Why? Initially because I was furious with him, she admitted with a rueful smile. I actually marched into his office the day after we got back from our honeymoon, intending to tell him off for humiliating me at my own wedding. And how did that go? I asked, unable to suppress a small smile of my own. About as well as you'd expect when confronting the CEO of your husband's law firm, she replied dryly. He listened to my entire angry speech, then calmly asked if I was finished, and would I like to hear his perspective now? That sounds like Harold, I said, remembering his composed demeanor at the wedding. He told me about his mother, Heather continued. How she cleaned houses for wealthy families while raising him alone. How she died before seeing him graduate from law school. How his biggest regret was not publicly acknowledging her sacrifices while she was alive. I felt a pang of empathy for Harold, understanding now why my situation had resonated so deeply with him. He's become something of a mentor to both James and me, Heather explained. He's helping James navigate firm politics, and he's been giving me perspective on things I should have understood long ago. Like what? I prompted. Like the fact that true success isn't about appearances or social climbing. It's about integrity, hard work, and never forgetting who helped you along the way. She smiled wryly. Basically, everything you tried to teach me that I was too stubborn to hear. We finally turned our attention to our neglected lunch, eating in a silence that felt more comfortable than any conversation we'd had in years. I'd like to invite you to dinner next week, Heather said as we were finishing. At our place. Nothing fancy, just the three of us. I thought maybe we could cook together, like we used to when I was little. If you want to. The invitation, so simple yet so meaningful, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'd like that very much. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Heather hesitated. There's one more thing. I have something for you, but it's at home. Would you mind following me there now? It won't take long. Curious, I agreed, following her car to the upscale apartment building I had last visited under such different circumstances. The doorman greeted Heather by name, nodding respectfully to me as we entered. James is at work, Heather explained as she unlocked the door. But he knows I'm giving this to you today. The apartment looked different somehow, warmer, less like a showroom and more like a home. Family photos now adorned the previously stark walls, including several of Heather and me from her childhood that I hadn't seen displayed in years. It's here, she said, leading me to what had previously been a formal dining area but now appeared to be a casual sitting room. On the main wall hung a beautifully framed photograph I recognized immediately. Heather at age 7, sitting on my lap on the steps of our Riverdale apartment. I was in my cleaning uniform, having just returned from a shift, my face tired but smiling. Heather was holding up a school art project, beaming with pride. I found it in a box of old photos, Heather explained softly. I don't even remember who took it. Laura did, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It was your first grade art show. I couldn't attend because of work, so you saved your project to show me when I got home. Heather stood beside me, both of us gazing at the image of our former selves. I look so happy, she observed. So secure. You were loved, I said simply. That creates security, even when everything else is uncertain. I'm having copies made for every room, Heather said, surprising me. To remind me daily of who I really am and where I came from. To remind me of what real love and sacrifice look like. I turned to her, this daughter who had broken my heart and was now trying, imperfectly but sincerely, to